Today's episode is going to be a little different. We're just going to talk status. Now, I'm not producing every detailed video on this swap, but I will go through and talk about what I did. But before we get into it, I really would like you guys to become familiar with our subscription status. Now, basically, for $40 a week, you can end up getting a subscription to help with your swap, to help with anything you might have on your car, electrical, mechanical, a noise that might be coming. It will all be remote service for helping you to get to the root cause of your issue. For the most part, I've had a lot of success with this. Wiring. People have questions about wiring. How do I hook this up to that? Engine swap wiring, N54 related, M60, whatever type of engine swap you're doing into whatever chassis you're doing, I can help you there. Through Zoom calls, through emails, phone calls, whatever medium is most comfortable for you, I will end up helping you out in any way that you want. So let's get back to the car at hand here and talk about some of the details involved with where I'm at here. As you can see, I've got the LT1 installed. That's right, it is installed. The LT1 and the TR6060 transmission are completely installed, sitting on its own weight, on its brackets, custom subframe, custom transmission mount bracket, and everything is good to go. I am very proud to where I've gotten on this swap so far, and I would really just like to talk about it with you and just help you guys understand the effort involved here. There's a lot of thinking involved. I am so thankful that we've gotten past this part of the swap. This took a long time, and I want to emphasize time. Why? Because it takes a long time to figure out where everything is going to go. Not only do you need to figure out your clearances left and right, up and down, but you need to also understand where is your power steering going to go? Where's your rack going to go? Where are your heater core routing going to go? How about your air conditioning lines? What about your condenser, your radiator? Is you going to have room for a fan, for a puller fan, or are you going to have to do a pusher fan? What about integrating everything with the cluster that's on the E24 or your swap car at the point in time you're doing it? There's a lot of things to consider. That's way more than just throw the engine in and you're good to go. So next time you buy a set of engine brackets and transmission brackets from a company like Garagistic or Condor or something like that, just consider all the research that's gone into it. A lot of work that goes into this, and let me help to describe to you a little bit about why it's so difficult. Drivetrain alignment hinges on one major component, and that is your drive shaft. On most of the T56 transmissions, actually, you have a slip joint right on the output of the transmission, and then you have a U-joint with a single piece drive shaft that goes to another U-joint that goes to the differential. Here, the TR6060 transmission is a little bit different in that it actually has a Guibo-style output, which makes it really difficult to balance by any local place. But it's really important that you understand that the Camaro and this BMW had a two-piece drive shaft with a center bearing. And as such, the location of the drivetrain is increasingly important. I've described this in other videos as well, but you have to make sure that that first piece of that drive shaft that connects to the Guibo on the output of the transmission is completely flush with the Guibo. If there's an angle there, then every time that you turn the Guibo, every time that the Guibo does one rotation, you're gonna have compression and expansion of the Guibo. Now that's what it's designed to do, but only minute changes, right? Not big changes of angle. So when you align your drivetrain, you need to take into account the location and angle from the output of the Guibo transmission to the center bearing of the drive shaft. So I'll get into that a little bit more, but that is really the one thing that defines the positioning of the engine. So let's get the car up in the air and talk about some of the subframe modifications that I've made, some of the driveline modifications that I made, and also how do the brackets look at this point in time. Starting off underneath, you can see that I had to rebuild a new subframe. So what I did was I basically cut off both ends of the subframe right here and also right over here. Then I ended up using some angle iron and welded that to the subframe. That way, I was able to connect the two subframes with this is a 1/4 inch thick steel piece of 2-inch tubing, square tubing. And as you can see, the proximity here, I can probably get my finger in there, and I can also get my finger in there. So the proximity of to the oil pan is such that lifting the engine out from the top, like you'd normally do for most cars, most engines, you cannot do here. So the engine, the whole drivetrain must drop down, which is not uncommon for swapped engines, especially if everything is tight. In this case, the only part that's tight is here at the subframe, because this is where the steering rack needs to be placed, and I gotta work on that next. But as far as engine position and location, I have everything set. These were off-the-shelf brackets that I had purchased. Get some light on there. These are off-the-shelf brackets that I had purchased that have a polyurethane circular bushing that get bolted directly to the chassis. Now, just so you know, LT1 blocks have a different 4-bolt pattern than the LS series previous. This is a Gen V LT1. Same thing here, same bolt pattern. You can actually intertwine the two, but and you can also rotate this way, or you can flip it around or twist it around so that this is actually facing more forward, depending on your situation. For me, it needed to be faced more backward. So as far as the engine goes, I think that everything is where it's gonna be. The headers here on this side is pretty good. You can see I'm gonna be able to come down and over on this side very easily. And same thing on this side, I'm gonna be able to come down and just kind of curve around and get to this little nook, right? So that's really where the exhaust is gonna end up living. And I'm really glad that I was able to get a Holley oil pan, 302-20 oil pan, to really help to bring the engine as low as possible without having the oil pan be so low that it's gonna end up scraping. As you can see here, the oil pan height is the same as the subframe itself. So let's make our way over to the transmission suspension. This here is a custom 1/4-inch bracket that I had bent using a metal bender on a press. I was able to drill my M8 and my M10 bolts, and it gets connected to the engine by virtue of this bracket here. The description of where I have had acquired that is in down below. And there are 2 bolts that come from this bracket here down to this. And this right here is a rubber bushing, and this one here is another rubber bushing. So both of these are rubber bushings that basically suspend the transmission side to the body. So this is basically set in place. This is 1/4-inch steel, so it's really strong and it isn't going anywhere. So I am not concerned about that. And then when this bracket here bolts directly to the transmission by virtue of M10 by 1.5 tapped helicoils that I put on either side of the engine. One's over here, that rusty head bolt, and then there's another one right over there. What helped define the left and right position is where the drive shaft was going to end up being. And as you can see, the center bearing is supposed to go right there, and the drive shaft, the output shaft, is clearly too long, so it needs to be shortened, and I need to find someone to do that. But the reason that the defined engine position is so important is because you can see here, it kind of moves, right? I mean, it's supposed to bolt on these 3 bolts, just like BMW, but each of these 3 pieces fits very snug up against the guibo, right? And when you do that and you push it, hold it there, you're gonna see that the drive line is exactly right smack in the center of where it needs to be. So that's the most important thing, as I was explaining earlier, that defines your drive line position is the location of this drive shaft. So if you didn't position the engine right and it's sitting there like that, right, down below, and you find out that you have a huge gap, or let's say it's to the side and you have a huge gap like that. See that gap right down there? That is really bad. That means that your guibo is going to flex at every rotation. That's really, really bad. So you need to make sure that everything is completely straight and square before you find your engine's final resting place. Now, as I explained earlier, the TR6060 output is very similar to BMW's. You can see right here, it's got a very large guibo that is free to spin. I have a little bit of a pretty close location there that I need to figure out how to bang that through. And that's what most of this is gonna be. I have a couple of locations. That's actually okay. I think right over here, it's pretty close. So I need to, you know, when I remove this, I need to mark those locations and bang the wall out a little bit before I, you know, pour 15 the whole inside. So this is all basically done. This is all basically done. So now you kind of understand the theory of what was going on in my head. All these things need to kind of play into it and talk together for everything to work. You need to consider the entire design before you establish your engine position. So that's why this is the way it is. Now let's talk really quick about accessories. All right, so primarily you've got 4 accessories, right? You got your air conditioning compressor, you have your alternator, you have your power steering pump, and you also have your water pump. And I'm considering the water pump as an accessory here because it does play into the fitment, and it's something that I needed to consider as I place the engine. Am I gonna need to modify frame rails? Am I gonna need to go with a different accessory package? When you go to a different accessory package on the LT or LS series, you're basically shifting everything. There's no way that you can just shift one thing without it affecting the other things. And water pump pretty much drives that entire mentality. Here, I was able to place the engine in a location that still uses the same LT1 Camaro accessory positions, with exception to one thing, and that's power steering. Let's talk about each one of these individually and talk about how each of these accessories will end up getting bolted onto the LT1 and not have to cause any problems with potential integration into the E24. First is the air conditioning compressor. This is the compressor with its bracket here, and the compressor gets installed onto the LT1 just like this. Now it's tight. This is the only item here that is actually kind of tight, and that's all right. Because if it's a little bit tight, I can handle that. I can deal with that. So this is basically where it's gonna end up living, right? Just like that, right? You can see it's gonna be very close over here on the frame rail, but that is just an electrical connector. That's all that is. So I'm really not concerned about that. So there is a slight interference on the electrical connector on the frame rail here. So I'm gonna mark that, and I'm gonna be able to modify the location of that as I go through. Now just take into account your lines are gonna be coming out over here. And the lines on the E24 are over there, just like most BMWs, older BMWs are all over there. So we need to take those lines, I'll show you them in a second, and route them around and directly into the compressor here. So that's gonna be a bit of a challenge. The routing is gonna be a bit more complex than if the air conditioning compressor was on the other side. But that's okay. At least we don't have to make any other changes to the accessories. Now let's take a look at the next. Power steering. This engine came on a 2016 Camaro that had electric steering, which means it wasn't hydraulic, which means there was no pump. The pump now comes from aftermarket kits that you can find online. ICT Billet actually produces a kit that has a couple different brackets, and it allows for an LS3 pump with its own pulley to be installed right in this location. You use a different serpentine belt because the belt is now going to be going through to a power steering pulley as well, so that will end up needing to be accounted for. I had ordered these parts and they haven't come in yet, but I want to test fit it. I don't anticipate that I'm going to have a lot of issues with fitment, but it's going to fit somewhere in this location. And having said that, the rack is down below, the reservoir is right here, and the pump will be here. So everything will basically be in this location for direct drops to the high pressure and the low pressure on the actual rack. All right, let's talk alternator. The alternator is right here from the LT1, and it installs right down here, just like that. As you can see, this lines up really nicely with the outer ribs on the pulley, and there are no interferences that I can see here. So I have really not much to say about the alternator. Looks like it's gonna fit just fine. Okay, let's talk about the water pump. The reason I'm considering this an accessory is primarily because it is so large, and it really is the entire hub for all the other accessories. So if you find that you need to change the location of the alternator, well, you're gonna need to move and find a new location for the water pump. The water pump is integral. It connects to both of the cylinder heads, both of the sides of the block rather. And it has your thermostat integrated, it has your sensor integrated. So the sensor is defined by the wiring, as well, so we can talk about the wiring next, but the engine position that I have here basically allows for the existing stock location of the water pump. And this is great because the power steering pulley installs on these two bolts, which is going to be up here, like I said earlier. This is exactly where I want everything to go. The thermostat right here has an outlet that goes to the upper part of the radiator, and this comes down and below. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can. From here, it goes down below to the other side of the radiator. So the reason that this is important is because there is a lot of hookups. This maintains your vacuum for carbon canister. All these lines kind of hook up into this for the PCV system. And of course, on the other side of this are your two heater lines. These two lines actually are going to end up going around, back, and through the the two lines that are over there along the firewall. And those are important because I had chosen the location of this engine to be not too far back, not too far forward. If I had it too far back, I wouldn't be able to get my wiring harness installed back there. I wouldn't be able to get my heater hoses installed back there. But now that I actually have that latitude, I think I'm going to be in really good shape. So as I stated earlier, there are a lot of options for the Gen V LT1 accessory packages. You can move things over wherever you want, but just know that if you're going to move one accessory, you're probably going to end up moving them all. It's a snowball effect. With the way that we have it set up here, and getting the engine positioned where it is, no accessories need to move. All I need to do is add a power steering pump. The great part about what I've done is that it requires no modifications to the existing wiring loom. The engine harness expects the alternator to be there, it'll be there. It expects the temperature sensor to be there, it'll be there. Everything will hook up exactly the way that it should. And that involves very few hours for your wiring harness updates, extending wires, cutting things like that do just take time. And by positioning the engine in the right place, you can actually eliminate a lot of that extra work. And you keep it as factory as possible. For an engine like this, which is as amazing as it is, it's probably a good idea to keep it factory, at least for now. It's 455 horsepower. It's going to be really powerful. So that's basically what I got, guys. Thanks a lot for listening. This is a bit of a different video, kind of capping off what I've already done as opposed to seeing me do it in real time. If you have any questions or comments about what I'm doing or what I'm offering here, if you have a question or a swap idea that you'd like me to take a look at in 2021, please give me a call, let me know. I'm very excited to talk to you about it and work through it. Until then, thanks a lot, guys. Take it easy.